Hi, I'm Robert Scoble, and if you're a developer trying to use Facebook or Twitter, you need to use the APIs. But how do you learn what those APIs do? Well, you could look them up in a manual or a FAQ or something like that. But why wouldn't you want a tool that lets you actually look at those APIs live as the data is going by? And wouldn't you like some service that helps you build these systems and debug them? Well, today we're going to see a company that does all that. So who are you?
I'm Sam Ramji. I'm VP of Strategy at Apigee, and I really see that as being the main scaffold. I don't have one particular job. I just kind of stand in place until whatever team or project is kind of healthy enough to stand by themselves, and then I fire myself and go do something else.
Last time we saw you at the Twitter Chirp conference, you showed me your tool, which lets me look at what's coming back from the Twitter API.
Yeah, that's right.
Give me a sense of what that tool does, just to bring everybody up to
Sure.
speed.
So it lets you see the structure of what your program would see in the Twitter API. Everybody thinks the Twitter API is 140 characters, just like the service, but no, it's totally untrue. Yeah. Right? It's got all these different fields, all this other data. So you can
give me a sense of some of the data that you might see.
Oh
if you
boy, annotations. You've got location. You've got the client that it was sent from. You've probably got other stuff that the program that's communicating might have wanted to add into it. That was sort of the annotation concept they launched at Chirp. So,
yeah.
It actually ends up being more like a kilobyte rather than 140 characters.
It's pretty crazy.
Per tweet.
All the data that goes behind a tweet.
It is.
You don't think that there's a lot of stuff that's underneath, but there is.
And people are fascinated by it. And as a developer, if you are reading documentation to get that, as opposed to like seeing it stream by in a way that really makes sense to you, then it's much harder to write applications that behave properly. So what the console has done is we've given people a bike to ride rather than a book to read about how to ride a bike. So we've just found people in the Twitter development community really pick up the tool and kind of crank it up. And I have to thank you for bringing some light to it, because we really didn't know what to expect. And after people started hearing about it from your show, we've built this amazing following. So it's been really fun. We've learned a ton from our users. It's been great.
Well, it's cool. So you've in the past few months since then, you've also turned on Facebook, right?
Absolutely. So we're an agile team. We're a lean startup, to quote Eric Ries, and we've shipped something every month. So we've shipped Facebook support, which is really a lot of fun. Facebook's done a beautiful job of their API. It's the Graph API. So if you think about all of Facebook, every single thing that you have in Facebook, a feed, a friend, an event, a relationship, a movie, anything that you like, is represented as an object. Okay, so what? Well, the power is they're all connected to each other in what's called a graph. You experience the graph day to day through the Facebook interface, like click, 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 this is a cool application. But if you wanted to bust out of the Facebook frame and use that in a totally different way, Facebook gives you that ability through the Graph API.
So if you're a developer and you're thinking, how can I come up with a really weird view into the Facebook graph?
Yeah.
I need to figure out what the graph can show me and how I would hook it up.
So I've got an itch to scratch. I'm like, I care about movies, and I want to have an app that shows all of the most recently liked movies by all of my friends.
Yeah.
Nothing else about the friends, not their names, just the movies, and I just want that in a stream. So if you did like a flipboard for movies, right?
Yeah.
You would need to know what that graph looks like. How do you crawl the graph? If you do something with the graph object, what's the data come back as, right? It's all JSON data. How's it laid out? What's my program going to see? What am I going to parse? One of the really interesting things about Facebook is they continue to change their security policies. So as a result of that, what the developers get is you have what I call the sort of the false success problem. You get a 200 OK coming back as an HTTP response, but you get no data, which is the correct response, right? It's like JSON, open bracket, close bracket, that's your data. Because that user didn't give you the permission to be able to see that stuff, so it said, OK, you did good, but we're giving you no data. So if you didn't anticipate that as a developer, then you've got more pain in the process.
Like if you're looking at the Facebook Places API,
yes,
some people have turned that off, right? And
yes,
other people, like me, I'm totally public, right?
Right,
you can look at all my data, right?
That's a perfect example.
Yeah.
But there's also things that are missing, right? So Places, I think, is a good example where you can't necessarily ask Facebook what was the most recent place that was checked in. You just get the whole list. So if you wanted to build an application that was continually polling places, buffering it, and then sort of sorting it by time based on what the program got and hand you something else, you'd need to use the Graph API. There's no way you're going to use web scraping for that.
Yeah.
So we found that people have started using our tool for that, to crawl their own, a little bit of narcissism, right? Crawl your own graph, see what, and maybe a little bit of privacy. What can programs see about me that I'm not aware of? What are my privacy settings doing? But also building net new applications.
Facebook is quite different. I would imagine the API is quite different than the Twitter API, right?
Super different.
Twitter is just a message that's going out, and it's fairly flat, and you can see it all in one screenful.
Yep.
Facebook, I bet, you use the term introspection. You can see inside me, right? Because I'm me, and then I have my music, or my photos, or my videos, or my location.
That's right.
And so does your tool let you click on that and see all my music that I put in?
Absolutely, and actually this is one of the great things about being an agile startup is we showed our stuff off at a Facebook meetup, and Matt Kelly, who's a local Bay Area Facebook evangelist, said, hey, wouldn't it be cool if you just automatically had introspection? Now, why is introspection cool? We talked about it being a graph of objects. We didn't talk about it being a graph of data. So what does that mean? Each object has a bunch of things that you can and can't do to it. And that varies, right? You can see how movies link to your friends, but you can't see, you can't see how movies link to events necessarily, right? There can be some relationships there. So we included by default, after you see the data in the interface, you're going to see all the different Facebook methods that you can call on that data. What are all the methods that take that particular object as a parameter? And then you click on it, and we'll let you traverse the graph. So that's been really fun to see people responding to that and playing with it.
It's a lot of fun, and being able to see all different things the way a programmer would see it is a lot of fun, and very educational about how to think about an app that would do something.
Well, we've also discovered some developer behavior that we suspected all along, but we didn't see until we enabled it, which was sharing. So we stole the concept of Android or social sort of share this button. And so you can share your behavior in our console. So if you stumble over a particular use case and you're trying to learn about it, you're trying to show it to a buddy, or you're getting an error message and you want to know why, you can click the share button, and that'll give you a URL that you can post into an email, you can post it into a message board or whatever, and somebody else can come back and see the exact same thing. Now, why is that important? In a world of Facebook and Twitter, we're not in an old world web where you can cache a page for a couple of days.
Yeah.
These things are changing all the time, so it's a little bit like the Zen expression, you cannot step in the same stream twice.
Yep.
That applies here too. So how do you help somebody debug a call that they made to an API even an hour ago when the response has changed and you might not get the same results?
Yeah.
So we created the share feature where you really snapshot it, you have that exact data, it's stored anonymously, it's got no information with you, you don't need to sign up for the service, it's just a tool that's hanging out there. And that's been really neat. We started to see that propagate through the internet.
This helps you debug a real-time app in a new way.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's interesting.
It's really fun. So by sitting there as sort of a service that helps move your traffic through, we can hang on to that for you, and you can take a look at everything. You can look at it as being a log function, but the difference between a log and what we've built is this is really socially centered. We expect that developers are social, creative people who naturally reach out to each other for help, want to help each other, and the more that we can show you what actually happened, give you an object view instead of a cut and paste of a little bit of an HTTP response object that sort of robs you from knowing what were the OAuth headers, did they include those, what was in the URL. It's really fun. So we've started to see people post those links all over the web. We see that traffic come in. We're like, yeah, people are using the tool.
Authentication is interesting to talk about, but also mobile is interesting because the different browsers that are going to hit this data source need different data pulled out of it, right?
That's right.
If you're using a mobile browser, you want to see different stuff. Tell me, are you noticing developers care about being able to say, what would a mobile browser see? What would a full-blown Google Chrome browser on a desktop see? And what would a piece of crud browser on a Symbian phone see?
The browser that I coded up on my afternoon spare time. Yeah, we're seeing a little bit of interest in sort of what are the user agents and what's that interaction. But with APIs more frequently, people are getting back mostly the same data. And with mobile developers, we're seeing two key trends. One thing is that all that extra stuff in a tweet, I'll just use the Twitter example, that sucks up your 3G bandwidth. And not that you're paying for the data overage, but it's slow. So you might have only wanted the 140 characters for your client app and not all of this metadata that's kind of carried around. So people want to flatten that data and just get at the core of it. So they want to modify that API. So they sort of virtualize the Twitter API as it comes into the mobile device. The other thing that we're seeing is that people are really, mobile is hugely driving the adoption of APIs on the provider side. So Twitter and Facebook are not the only ones, right? They're digital natives. Lots and lots of digital immigrants are building these things. You know, companies like Sears, companies like Blockbuster are all building these things out.
Absolutely.
And mobile ends up being the driver. So what the developers are wanting out of that is, it's another kind of virtualization. They want to change the response object. So as the response is coming back and handing a big chunk of XML or JSON, that can be kind of a big steak to chew down on a small device that's doing all that processing of software. Yeah. People are asking for p-lists. They're like, you know, if that API
what is a p-list?
Just be a p-list.
For people
so p-list is an Objective-C data structure, and it is built into iPhone hardware, which is awesome if you're doing that processing. So that's why Steve Jobs is really strict about everybody needs to use Objective-C, because the structures of the hardware actually support that to be run faster with less battery and all that stuff. Okay. Now, have you ever heard of anybody using a p-list API?
Not me.
I'd be surprised. I mean, you know, Twitter doesn't have a p-list API, Facebook doesn't have a p-list API, but if you want iPhone and iPad and iOS developers in general to be able to really easily use this data, shouldn't you have one? Yeah, but people don't, because then they get into versioning. They're like, okay, I've got my JSON API and my XML API and my plist API, and how many layers am I going to code? But people are looking for a way to just say, hey, could I just push the make this a plist button and just have it go? So we're working on a mobile developer service right now. We've done a lot of rounds of feedback from iOS developers, and it's getting really clear what they're looking for.
Now you're doing a deal with Heroku as well, right?
That's exactly right. So that's a great opportunity to learn about developers. So number one reason people write apps on Heroku is mobile. Yeah. The number two reason is...
Well, I thought it was because they support Ruby on Rails. Right?
Oh, for sure. Okay, so actually...
we interviewed them a couple weeks ago.
actually, you know, what's interesting is that a number of people go to them not because they support Ruby on Rails, but because they scale out and they've heard it's easy. Yeah. And some people are learning Rails to use Heroku. Interesting. We actually did a joint meetup with Heroku and Twilio and us. We had Twitter and Facebook, and we had a really great community developer named Abraham Williams come out from Seattle, and they all spoke to about 200 developers who were wanting to build social apps. We call it the Social App Workshop. I met a bunch of people there who had never coded before maybe 2 weeks or even 2 months ago, but they were starting to get in because of APIs, and they heard Ruby and Rails was good. So some of them had just come into our workshop off of a Rails camp. Yeah. So I was shocked by that, actually. That's kind of why I'm seizing on it, I guess. I didn't expect people would go like, you know, I'm going to learn Rails to use Heroku. But anyway, the number one reason, once you've got the Ruby under you, is mobile. The number two is social. Yeah. Mobile there is because it can scale up. You know, social, kind of the same reason. If it gets popular, then that's great. What we found with Heroku is that you've got sort of an architectural mismatch in the world today between cloud computing and API providers. So cloud computing is this fantastic environment where you can scale up magically. Yeah. You know, you call an API, you would give a command. You know, you go to Rackspace Cloud, you go to EC2, you go to whatever. You make an API call, bam, you got more storage, you got more compute power, you got more bandwidth, right? Whatever you want. But you also generally lose control of your environment. Can you confirm that you're going to absolutely have this IP address? Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. In the Heroku environment, which is a really broad environment. And
somebody asked me for 2 IP addresses, you know, and sometimes it's tough to get that to happen.
That's right.
You know, you have to do some magic. So.
And pre-specify it, and it will be the same day after day, right? So, you know, it's obviously a value-added service that cloud providers should and can offer. Yeah. But there's always going to be a segment of people who are not going to be able to, you know, think through that, right? I've met salespeople who have an engineering background. They're writing apps using APIs to automate their Salesforce stuff. Right? These are not guys who'd call themselves developers at all.
Yeah, and this gets back in the debugging thing, because if you're writing, I know friends who've written Twitter apps, they start hitting weird APIs, and if they're sharing an IP address, that IP address can get shut off for a couple minutes or 58 minutes sometimes. You know,
that's exactly right.
I've gotten shut off for 58 minutes, so I'm not even a developer, right? So,
well, there you go.
Because I'm using Tweety or TweetDeck or something like that, and I do something over and over and over real fast, and all of a sudden, whoa, I can't use the app anymore.
You're running exactly into the problem that we're talking about. So, you know, when the back end's running in the cloud, then you've got that scale issue. And then when you've got your clients running wherever they might be in the world, anything that happens that starts messing with that IP address structure makes most API providers start to go, whoa, what's happening here? right? So whether you're a huge provider like Twitter or Facebook, or if you're a fairly new and recent provider just coming up to speed, you're trying to understand and sort your traffic.
Yeah.
Now, if you've got a multiplicity of IP addresses and you can't provide that kind of firm guarantees, what do? We found that since we're a gateway in the cloud, right? Apigee is an API infrastructure that runs for free in the cloud. As you come and drive your API traffic through Apigee to the provider, we can provide a very rigorous set of guarantees around what IP addresses are coming. We've built relationships with providers to say we'll send you only clean traffic. We will work with you collaboratively to make sure that there's no abuse on the system. Yeah. So as a result, we've ended up with some nice relationships, and we've been able to set up a bunch of developers for success. So we already got hundreds of Ruby developers on Heroku, to the point where the community has started to build Apigee support into the Ruby gems for both Twitter and for OAuth.
Okay.
So we feel like blessed by that. We think that's cool. It's a sign that our stuff is really helping people.
That's really cool, because now I don't have to deal with Twitter and figure out why my API calls aren't working every
That's right.
N hours.
That's right.
And you're gonna be the guy I call, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Hey man,
that's right.
You promised me these things will work, and they're not working. So.
That's right. And we're able to pass you back error messages and say, oh, you're getting a failure because Twitter is down. Yeah. Right, and so that's a better class of failure to get. You got a whale, rather than I ran out of rate limiting, not because I used it, but because some other guy used it, and it was all coming from the same IP address. Yeah. So those are the kinds of problems that we're starting to see with cloud architectures. To summarize it, I guess the world's gone from libraries to APIs.
Yes.
So APIs are the new atomic unit of dependency for really powerful apps.
Yep.
How is it that an Apple iPhone developer can build a killer app in 2 months? Because they're not using the tools that you and I grew up working with in the 90s, right? Where you're not compiling everything from scratch, right? You got all these libraries and you're in DLL hell, and but on the good side, you knew what libraries you were shipping with. Yeah. Now you don't know those. The APIs are kind of changing under you, and they can enforce limits. Imagine if string compare, right, or some basic library function said, oh, 200 calls this hour, I'm out. Now, if you were running a sort function, you probably ran out of that in the first minute, 2 minutes of the hour. Now we're starting to see that behavior with
especially
APIs.
For your weirder users like me. I have 9,000 friends on Foursquare, right? So if you're starting to do some lookups and trying to figure out what's going on with my users, my friends,
that's right.
Boom, you finished it.
Well, I'm spending a lot of time reading or listening to Chris Anderson's book Free, and one of the key concepts he talks about is abundance thinking versus scarcity thinking. We're starting to be able to look at Twitter messages as a place that we do abundance thinking, right? Because there's so many messages, the filtering apps that you've featured recently.
Yeah, Data Sift.
Right, Data Sift, which is an awesome example of how you can take this sort of abundance thinking to Twitter. But not everything has the abundance of the fire hose, right? Some of them actually have scarcity on the API address. But as you get tools that make you more productive with your entire network, you want to be able to treat API calls like they're free. So we're trying to help with that problem, right, by having cleaner traffic, having it be more predictable, and then that lets you have a lot more innovation, right? You couldn't have had apps like Data Sift or some of the new Twitter analytics applications that are popping up that are
Radiant 6 or Code Tweeter, all those fun things.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember the name of the guy who does the awesome tweet wall application, but all of those types of things, right? Yeah. You can't get to the next level unless you can start to decouple this API from moving IP addresses and just the overall API rate limit dependency. So how can we help the industry get smarter about how they manage access to the API? Because developers need it, they want it, let them in, but how do you make sure that you're taking care of your servers and your users too?
It's a crazy new world.
It's an awesome new world. That's the real privilege we have, is sort of watching how sitting at this interface of API development, how things are changing. I'll give you, I guess, two last things that have really popped for me recently. One is that world governments are not things that you think about as being like super techno savvy, right? I mean, the Obama administration is doing better than previous regimes have, but they vary. We've found that China has gotten API savvy. So we found that a number of users of our service, of Apigee, were using it to get to Twitter, because China uses the Great Firewall to block free speech. So you cannot get to twitter.com from China. So there are apps like JibJib and others, and so we have some developers. We've got developers in 85 countries now, which is cool, including China. They're using Apigee sort of to tunnel through via APIs into Twitter to let them, let those users have free speech and communicate openly. Well, about at the end of August, we found a bunch of notifications from our users in China. Hey, my app's not working. We did a little more digging. We found out that China's figured out that we're an API gateway. So they're sniffing API traffic, figuring out that it's basically got the structure of a tweet and blocking access to our servers. So that's an amazing thing. I did not think that we were going to see that kind of sophistication around APIs going mainstream, that the Chinese government's looking at it as a way that information leaks out of the company, but APIs are here. So
what was the second one?
The second one is that just the surge in developers. I was talking a little bit about lean startups before, and also a little bit about Chris Anderson's book Free, which amazingly he wrote a couple of years ago. Yeah. I can't even believe it. I got an opportunity to be interviewed by him because I was at Microsoft doing open source at the time. Yeah. And of course he had the same question. How does Microsoft compete with Free? Yeah. Boy, that was a fun conversation.
They seem to have been doing pretty well at that.
Yeah, it did do pretty well. But we were at OSCON, so sort of a certain typical mode. But he said, the best way to get adoption is to be free. Offer as much of what you can for free as possible. Yeah. So we had really we'd taken the Apigee service, which was really just a service line built inside a much larger company. It was about 8 of us working in a company of about 70. And we said, what if we take API gateways and API infrastructure and make it totally free? Well, it took off so fast, right? Thanks to you and to others and people building against APIs. We realized it's time to change the company. That's actually got so much recognition and it's so helpful to so many people. That's the heart. So we've renamed the company to Apigee. We've built a continuum from sort of what we do for free to what we serve for enterprises, and it's just really satisfying to see that the power of the community has got that kind of sort of brand influence, that it was a no-brainer sort of management decision from our board, which is, yep. They're looking for stability and predictability. They're not like, hey, change your name next week.
We did the same thing with OpenStack, right? So.
Well, you did a great job with that, by the way. I was really happy to see how that engagement went, and yeah. I think there's definitely a lot of proof there. I'm satisfied because I really believe the cloud will not be open until there is a provider that is running a cloud computing infrastructure that takes upstream contributions. Yeah. That was what made Linux really magical, is the upstream contributions. Lots of people get the whole, I'm going to make it open and then it can flow and you can use it wherever you like. OpenOffice is kind of like that. Yep. But OpenOffice is also famous for being a very closed open source project. They don't take many contributions. It's more like you can see my code. But if you want that vibrancy that Linux got, and you want that openness and freedom in the cloud, then OpenStack, I think, is really the only way to go. And I was lucky to get a chance to work with those guys for about 9 months before you launched a major announcement. So good job on that.
Where do we find you in the world?
Well, you can find me on the web. Apigee.com is the site. You can find me on Twitter at sramji, that's SRAMJI, yeah. Or sramji at apigee.com.
Very cool. Well, awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.